trillion in spending, avoiding a government shutdown. The president left the White House for the holidays last night. He first stopped at Joint Base Andrews to speak to troops and to sign the 2020 National Defense Authorization Act. The $738 billion act includes a 3% military pay raise, 12 weeks of paid parental leave for federal workers, and creates a new branch of the military, the Space Force.
For the first time since President Harry Truman created the Air Force over 70 years ago, think of that, we will create a brand new American military service. That's such a momentous statement. 70 years ago, the Air Force. With my signature today, you will witness the birth of the Space Force, and that will be now officially the 6th branch of the United States Armed Forces. That is something really incredible.
The president signed the additional spending measures that will keep the government funded through next September on board Air Force One. 9 protesters were killed in northern India today during violent demonstrations against a controversial new citizenship law. 23 people have died during protests against the legislation. It excludes Muslims but allows members of other religious groups who are in the country illegally to apply for citizenship.
This is a discriminatory act, and this discriminates between citizens based on religion, and therefore they want to divide the Indian society based on religion.
During today's violence, the government deployed an anti-terror squad to battle demonstrators who set a dozen vehicles on fire and burned down a police station. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi and his Hindu Nationalist Party continue to defend the law, calling it a humanitarian gesture. The United States is monitoring a warning from North Korea of a, quote, Christmas gift, which may mean a missile launch or test. The New York Times reported that military and intelligence officials are tracking North Korea's actions by the hour. Officials say any intercontinental ballistic missile launch or nuclear weapons test by North Korea would significantly raise tensions and halt diplomatic efforts in the region, keeping North Korea at the negotiating table until it vows to dismantle its nuclear program is a priority of the Trump administration. Earlier this month, North Korea said the U.S. was running out of time for negotiations and that there would be a, quote, Christmas gift if sanctions are not eased. In Australia, one person was killed today in brush fires that government officials are calling catastrophic. Near Sydney, firefighters battled flames in high winds and temperatures exceeding 104 degrees. 2 firefighters died Thursday, and several other people have died as a result of brush fires, which began more than 3 months ago. More than 3 million acres have burned, destroying 700 homes and injuring more than 20 firefighters. New South Wales remains in a 7-day state of emergency, with 2,000 firefighters battling 100 wildfires. To read more about the $1.4 trillion spending package signed by President Trump, visit pbs.org/newshour. The PBS NewsHour Politico Democratic debate on Thursday had the smallest number of candidates so far. One of those who made it into earlier debates, but not this week's debate, is former Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, Julian Castro. He joins us now from Seattle, Washington. Thanks so much for being here. Americans remain deeply divided over the impeachment of President Trump this week. There are polls in some swing states who show that more than half of voters actually oppose removing President Trump from office. Why do you think Democrats haven't convinced more Americans that President Trump should be removed from office?
Well, I think that's going to continue to happen as the evidence now in the Senate trial continues to be examined and is there for Americans of all different backgrounds to see with their own eyes and hear with their own ears. And so I actually have confidence that as this process continues to move along, because we're only halfway through it, but as the process continues to move along and people see and hear the evidence, that there is going to be more support for removing this president from office. The other thing we have to acknowledge, though, is we live in a very politically polarized time, and this president has tried to do everything that he can to fan the flames of that division. So it's not surprising that you're going to see numbers like this. But as people see the evidence and hear the evidence, I believe that you'll see more folks support his removal.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that there are too many millionaires in the race right now?
What I believe is that too oftentimes money talks in politics, whether that's the money of somebody who's able to self-fund and reach these thresholds by artificially boosting their poll numbers, pumping in tens of millions of dollars into TV ads and Facebook ads, or, as was discussed on the debate stage the other night, it's the money of special interests and people that contribute to campaigns and
The wine
contribute
cave?
to super PACs because the wine cave, candidates, where essentially you have people that may be influenced by the big special interests behind them. Both of those things are problematic. We need a democracy that belongs to the people. I'm very proud that the average contribution to my campaign is just under $20, and that I have one of the highest percentages of small dollar donors. It's the people out there giving their $10, $20, $25 that are making up my campaign. I'm proud of that.
Vice President Joe Biden would not commit to serving 2 terms if elected president. What do you make of that? And would you commit if you were elected to serving 2 terms?
Well, I would say that if I'm elected president, I'm going to work very hard on behalf of the American people, and I believe that we're going to make real progress in this country to boost prosperity for everyone. So I believe that I'd be in a good position to run for re-election. But, what I agree with is that none of that is certain. You never know how anything is going to go in your first term as president. So I understand it. I understand his answer. For me, I believe that if I work hard as president on behalf of the American people and we do well in this country, then, of course I would run for re-election.
You're sticking in this race, though you have struggled to gain some traction. What's keeping you going? Why stay in?
Throughout this campaign, I've been doing things differently from everybody else. I haven't been afraid to speak up and to go places in ways that other candidates won't. I've been speaking up not only for strengthening the middle class, but also for the poor, because somewhere along the way as Democrats, we forgot to fight as intensely for people who are poor. Just a couple of days ago, I was on Skid Row in Los Angeles visiting with people who are homeless to understand the changes that we need to make in our country so that everybody has a place to live. I visited a storm drainage tunnel in Las Vegas where people are living there underneath the Las Vegas Strip. They have nowhere else to lay their head at night. I want to make sure as well that no matter who you are, your background, that you're able to succeed. And my campaign has been about the most vulnerable people that are often cast aside and marginalized. So more and more people have found this campaign. And especially with young people out there, we have gained some traction that we can feel. And we're working as hard as we can to capture that, to harness it, and to beat expectations in Iowa and then springboard from there.
Well, thank you so much, Julian Castro, running for president. I appreciate you joining us.
Thank you.
7 Democratic candidates for president took the stage at the final debate of 2019 this week. One of those who didn't qualify based on poll numbers and fundraising was former Massachusetts Governor Deval Patrick. He joins us now from the campaign trail in Manchester, New Hampshire. Thanks so much for joining me, Governor.
I'm glad to be with you, Yamiche, but come on, really? That's the introduction? He's the one who wasn't on the stage? Come on.
Well, you're here now with us.
I'll get there.
You got in this race just last month. What do you see as your path to the nomination, given that some people think that maybe you entered too late?
Well, I'm later, but not late. And I thank you for the chance to make that point because, it's not late until the voters vote. And what's quite clear, even if you do trust the polling that's out there, is that there are other candidates who've been in for a long time, spent a lot of money and a lot of time, and it's still a wide open race. Large proportions, majorities of undecided voters in all of the early states. So we are respectful of the calendar. We will compete in all of the early states. We're spending a lot of time in New Hampshire and South Carolina in particular, because primaries are they're different in terms of how you organize than if it's intimate in New Hampshire, it's granular in Iowa, if you know what I mean. And we will be present in Iowa, but I think you'll see a lot more time spent here in New Hampshire and in South Carolina.
The Democratic National Committee has raised the threshold again for the next debate. It's going to be January 14th. This debate, Andrew Yang was the only candidate of color on stage. What do you make of that? And are you worried about the Democratic National Committee continuing to raise the bar?
Well, I think, look, I know there has to be some winnowing process. I will say I'm not sure that the debates, and I say this respectfully, having complimented you and your colleagues before we went on air on your conduct of the last debate. I am hoping that the format changes, not just to expose all of the candidates, but to create a better vehicle to communicate with the voting public, because with the exception of the most recent debate, many of them have felt more like a cage fight, where they were kind of almost small differences fussed about among the candidates, instead of the larger question, which to me is not about the character of the candidates, Democrat or the incumbent president. It's about the character of the country. And one of the reasons, indeed the reason I'm in, is because I think we see a moment right now, Yamiche, where the anxiety and frustration and even anger that people are experiencing about their economic and social lives is so widespread, there is an opportunity through solutions to unite the country. And my own leadership experience, both in the public sector and in the private sector, has been successfully to get people to turn to rather than on each other. And I think it's a moment we shouldn't miss.
The headline from the last debate was a fundraiser in a wine cave. You've had a very successful career in the private sector. What do you make of that being the headline? And is this a problem for the Democratic Party?
Well, I'm sorry that a debate that was so substantive otherwise had a headline about a wine cave. I don't think I've ever been in a wine cave. But I think it's kind of beside the point. I think many Americans agree with me, and I think many of the candidates on the stage, that we need a better way to fund our politics and our campaigns, that there is too much money, it is too influential, especially the dark money, and that we need to get this out of our politics. But beyond that, I think that the fact is that if we're going to unite the country, then we need to focus on what the real problems are. There are real problems around climate change, around criminal justice reform, around health care. And the issue when folks talk about millionaires and billionaires is not wealth, it's greed. And we have created a system that enables people to hoard all the benefits among a few, on the theory, discredited, by the way, that it would trickle down to everybody else. And we have to turn that around. So I regret that headline for a whole host of reasons, but to me it's sort of beside the point. There are bigger issues before us, and my campaign is about those bigger issues and how we make the American dream actually work for everyone, everywhere.
Well, thank you so much, Deval Patrick, running for president, former governor of Massachusetts.
Good to be with you. Take care.
One day after the U.S. House of Representatives approved 2 articles of impeachment, Democrats hoping to take on President Trump next November were on stage debating. And on that same night at a campaign rally in Michigan, the president spoke for more than 2 hours. He angrily blasted Democrats and attacked the impeachment process. Joining me now to discuss all of this are Chris Buskirk, editor and publisher of American Greatness, who is in Phoenix, Arizona, and Karine Jean-Pierre, Chief Public Affairs Officer at MoveOn.org in Washington, D.C. She's also the author of Moving Forward, a story of hope, hard work, and the promise of America. Thanks to both of you for joining me today. Karine, I'm going to start with you. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi is now indicating she may delay sending the articles of impeachment to the Senate. Who benefits from that potential strategy?
You know what, Yamiche, right now we're in a constitutional game of chicken. I don't think that our founding fathers ever thought that we would be in a situation where you have one body, the Senate, who seems to be wanting to collude with the executive branch. That is Mitch McConnell, who has basically said he's going to work hand in hand with the Trump administration. And with all of the guidance that we've received in the Constitution, we're kind of in a gray area. And what I think is happening, what it seems to be happening, is that Speaker Pelosi is essentially saying she wants a fair trial in the Senate and is using her leverage at this moment to make sure that happens. So right now, this is just where we are. We're in the holiday season. We won't know exactly what's going to be happening until after January 6th, when the House and the Senate comes back from the holiday.
House Speaker Nancy Pelosi is saying she might withhold those articles of impeachment from the Senate. What do you make of that? Karine says we're in a game of chicken here.
Yeah, I mean, I've got to tell you, Yamiche, this has got to be one of my favorite stories of the entire year. It just sort of tickles me because it demonstrates what a broken institution Congress in general is. And that's not really so much a hit on Democrats or Republicans. It just says, you know, here we are. We're talking about the impeachment of the President of the United States. Democrats have been talking about it, you know, basically since the beginning of 2017. They finally passed the articles, but they don't want to send them to the Senate. And so when I think about this, I think, you know, this is just sort of degenerated to the point where Congress has become like an artist collective performing for their relative constituencies and their patrons. We all know how this ends up. This eventually goes to the Senate. There's going to be a trial. Donald Trump's going to be acquitted, and then we're going to have to talk about the election. And so to the extent that this delays talking about the actual election that's happening in November, whether anybody likes it or not, I just don't see this how this helps Democrats. Mm-hmm. So I would think that Nancy Pelosi would want to get this over to Mitch McConnell and to the Republicans sooner mm-hmm. rather than later.
And Chris, sticking with you, Christianity Today, an evangelical magazine, came out in support of removing President Trump from office. The editor wrote that President Trump is an example of someone who's morally lost and confused. What do you make of that, and how are Republicans talking about that magazine coming out with that stance?
Yeah, so I thought this was a totally interesting story, and that you actually keyed in on the language that I thought was most interesting in that whole editorial by Mark Galli, who's the departing editor of Christianity Today. And so he says, yes, Donald Trump should be removed from office, but he uses as a predicate for that, he calls him morally lost. And the thing that jumped out at me about that language is that lost, you know, in a Christian context, that's a very freighted term, right? Christians talk about the saved and the lost. And so so it's just struck me that what Galli's doing here is he's setting up sort of this dichotomy where you have to think he's either saying on the one hand, well, he's morally lost, meaning Donald Trump isn't a Christian and therefore ought not to be in office. So is he saying that Christians ought not to be president? I hope not. Or on the other hand, what he's trying to do is wrap his political opinions in Christian vocabulary in order to try and basically mm-hmm. trick the readers of Christianity Today into believing him. And either way, I think that's super cynical.
Mm-hmm. Turning now to the Democratic debate, Karine, what do you make of how, if at all, that this Democratic debate might impact the Iowa caucuses? They're just around the corner. And if you want to, you can talk a little bit about what Chris just said. But I also really want to get to this Iowa caucus and this Democratic debate.
Well, first of all, congratulations to everyone at PBS. You guys did a fantastic job. It was a very, very good, moderated debate. So congratulations to you, Yamiche, as well. Look, I think it was, all in all, it was a good debate last week. Nobody did great and nobody did terrible. I think that having less people on the debate stage really allowed a real conversation about vision, about what people's plans are. Someone like Klobuchar really was able to take advantage of having less people on stage. Biden did well, Warren, and others like Bernie Sanders. I think it was a fine debate. As far as Iowa, we're less than 50 days to Iowa. We're in the holiday season. I think everything is kind of frozen into place. We're not going to see much movement in the polls until after January, when we get closer to clearly the caucus. And honestly, I mean, the polls have been the polls. The top three, the top four, that tier one has basically been what we see. I think when you think about Iowa caucus and the history of it and how it goes in the Democratic primary, usually it's someone that's kind of that breaks late that wins the Iowa caucus. So I actually think Iowa is wide open. Anyone can take it, and so it's going to be a wild ride come January. So buckle up.
And Chris, I spoke to Deval Patrick and Julian Castro, both still running for the Democratic nomination, but neither one of them got on stage. What do you think they might need to do about this? And also, Michael Bloomberg, he's actually showing support going up. Even though he's not going to be able to make the debate stage, he is pouring millions of dollars of ads into TV.
Yeah, I mean, Patrick and Castro, I mean, look, what they, I think, are probably best suited to do is align with one of the other candidates. I just don't see an opportunity for them to sort of break out and all of a sudden win Iowa or New Hampshire or something. Mike Bloomberg's sort of a different and in a way more interesting story because he just has the ability to blanket the airwaves, to hire staff in every state, and basically to suck up a ton of oxygen just by virtue of the fact that he can self-fund to the extent, I mean, he can literally spend more money than every other candidate combined. And that means something. I'm not sure what it means, but it means he can buy a lot of staff and he can buy some measure of support, and yet it still seems like he's just not that interesting or charismatic of a candidate. You know, I watched the debates the other night and I kept thinking, you know, everybody except Bernie Sanders sort of represents some flavor of the neoliberal consensus. Bernie Sanders I found totally fascinating because he is who he always has been. And as a result, I thought, again, this is just me right, as a conservative looking at him and saying, this is actually somebody who I found pretty interesting and really differentiating himself from the others.
Thank you so much, Chris Buskirk and Karine Jean-Pierre.
Thank you, Yamiche.
Thanks. Thanks, Yamiche.
This is PBS NewsHour Weekend, Saturday.
Christmas trees are a sign of the season, and those trees, from the biggest and most spectacular to the smallest, all need decorations. Some of the most prized come from a Mexican town where the art of making hand-blown glass ornaments is a source of economic success that lasts all year long. NewsHour Weekend's Yvette Feliciano has the story.
The handmade glass Christmas tree ornaments from the town of Talpujawa begin production over a more than 1,300-degree flame. Expert artisans transform long glass tubes into shapes that are then hand-painted and decorated. Tourists from all over the world visit local shops filled with the shiny and unique decorations.
The good thing for us is providing happiness to people with the products that we make for Christmas. It's happiness, a feeling of satisfaction, to know that we are giving joy to all families.
The town, northwest of Mexico City, once thrived on income from gold and silver mines, but a 1937 mudslide shut down most mining. The business of making handcrafted tree ornaments here began in the 1960s and now supports 10,000 full-time workers.
I think that about 60-70% of the population works in this sector. It's the breadbasket of the people.
Mexico's Ministry of Economic Development reports that 50 million ornaments are made each year in the town, with half exported to countries including the US, Japan, Malaysia, and Europe.
They are beautiful. They are at a good price. It's impressive. You don't find them at just any shopping center. Above all else, the variety. They're really beautiful. You never get tired of seeing so much beauty.
And finally, winter officially begins tonight in the Northern Hemisphere. That means both today and tomorrow will be the longest nights of the year. On the bright side, the days get longer starting Monday. And if you're in the Southern Hemisphere, it's summer. That's all for this edition of PBS NewsHour Weekend. I'm Yamiche Alcindor. Thanks for watching. Have a good night.
PBS NewsHour Weekend is made possible by Bernard and Irene Schwartz, Sue and Edgar Wackenheim III, the Cheryl and Philip Milstein family, Rosalind P. Walter, in memory of George O'Neill, Barbara Hope Zuckerberg, Charles Rosenblum, We try to live in the moment, to not miss what's right in front of us. At Mutual of America, we believe taking care of tomorrow can help you make the most of today. Mutual of America Financial Group, retirement services and investments. Additional support has been provided by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, a private corporation funded by the American people, and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
You're watching PBS.